Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking something genuinely fascinating. We are going to uncover the psychological and sociological machinery behind exactly how nations use movies to construct a shared past. Ever wonder why certain historical events feel so incredibly vivid to you, even if they happened decades before you were even born? Well, a lot of it comes down to the power of the screen. Let's dive right into this by asking you to think about the last historical movie you watched for a second. Think about the costumes, the swelling music, the gripping speeches. How much of what you remember as history is actually just, well, cinematic storytelling? It's a huge question because our individual memories are incredibly susceptible to the narratives we consume, especially when they're packaged as massive blockbusters. To figure out exactly how this works, we're going to hit 5 key areas: imagining the nation, cinema and mediascapes, forging sites of memory, remediating the 1971 war, and finally, modes of cinematic memory. Let's get right to it. All right, Section 1, Imagining the Nation. So the core idea here is that a nation absolutely needs a collectively agreed-upon past just to maintain its identity. The Irish scholar Benedict Anderson hit the nail on the head with this. He argued that nations aren't these ancient, spontaneous things that just popped up out of nowhere. Nope, they are modern, imagined political communities. And for an imagined community to actually stick together, it needs a seriously compelling shared story. Historian Ernest Renan takes this a step further, and it's super interesting. He highlights that suffering in common is basically the ultimate social glue for a national idea. Renan described a nation as a soul, made of 2 parts, the past and the present. When a nation's people believe they've suffered together and triumphed together in the past, it creates this intense spiritual principle that binds them in the present. Because of that powerful bond, modern nation-states intentionally push what academics call patriotic histories to unite their citizens. And honestly, wartime narratives are the absolute best tool for the job. Nation-states use these stories to teach citizenship, highlight a continuous history of national greatness, and often to stigmatize outsiders as enemies. It's a highly organized strategy to build national pride. Moving right along, Section 2, Cinema and Mediascapes. Enter the concept of the mediascape coined by Arjun Appadure. This perfectly explains why cinema is just so powerful. A mediascape is essentially a massive, complex repertoire of images and narratives. It blends documentary facts with pure entertainment so seamlessly that audiences often literally cannot tell reality from fiction. You end up inheriting a totally imagined world as the truth. You're not just watching a story, you're stepping into a carefully curated mediascape. But, this imagined reality doesn't just happen overnight. Before you can drop a specific war story, you have to prime the audience. Decades of books, TV shows, and films about the 1947 partition of India, stuff like Thomas, Train to Pakistan, and Ghadar, essentially premeditated the audience. They laid the emotional groundwork, preparing the public's psyche to deeply connect with the later stories of the 1971 war. Which brings us to Section 3, Forging Sites of Memory. Okay, let's talk about Pierre Nora's concept of lieux de mémoire, or sites of memory. A site of memory is definitely not some neutral thing just sitting in a history book. Actually, it's specifically invented or heavily reworked to serve a nation's ideological goals. It could be a physical monument, a national holiday, or even a heavily commemorated historical episode that acts as a symbolic anchor for a community's heritage. To give us a bit of context before we look at the films themselves, here's a quick chronological map of the geopolitical conflicts between India and Pakistan. You can see a long history here stretching from the 1947 partition right through 1965, 1971, and the 1999 Kargil conflict. But out of all these, one specific year was really elevated above the rest in the realm of collective memory. And that's 1971. Looking at this as neutral observers, we can see how the sheer scale of the 1971 event allowed the Indian state to forge it into the ultimate, unifying national site of memory. The iconic image of roughly 90,000 troops surrendering, paired with the annual December 16th celebration of Vijay Dawaz, absolutely cemented this specific war as an indelible, highly celebrated memory that is still a massive focal point for national pride. All right, Section 4, Remediating the 1971 War. So, how does cinema keep this memory alive? Well, it all comes down to Astrid Earle's theory of remediation. The idea here is that when a memorable event is represented over and over, first in books, then newsreels, and eventually giant blockbuster movies, the media versions actually start to overwrite the original historical event in our minds. The actual event gets totally replaced by a polished canon of circulating myths and narratives. And man, this list really illustrates the sheer volume of that remediation effort. Just look at all these blockbusters. From Border back in 1997 all the way to a huge surge in 2023 with films like Pippa and Samba Hador. It just proves how heavily the Indian cinema industry invests in this specific patriotic mediascape, repeatedly hammering this collective memory so it stays fresh for every new generation. And finally, Section 5, Modes of Cinematic Memory. To really understand how directors manipulate the past on screen, Astrid Errol divides these memory-making techniques into two main contrasting styles. First, you have the experiential mode, which is all about making you feel the gritty, everyday, lived-through reality of an event. And on the flip side, you've got the mythical mode, which elevates the past into a faraway, legendary, almost mythological status to build a grand cultural memory. Let's look at how both of these play out. The 1997 film Border is basically the textbook example of the experiential mode. When you watch it, you aren't just observing a war. You're practically living in the trenches with a small battalion of 120 soldiers on the Rajasthan border. The director focuses on the dirt, the limited food, and the raw battlefield terror. It's designed to make you feel intimately, physically connected to what those soldiers went through. Another fantastic experiential example is the 2021 film Bhuj, the Pride of India. This one takes the massive, almost incomprehensible scale of a geopolitical war and grounds it in localized, sweaty, everyday resilience. It tells the true story of 3,000 local women stepping up to urgently rebuild a destroyed airstrip. It uses that very real, localized struggle of common citizens to build a powerful sense of national grit. Now let's switch gears to the mythical mode. This style takes historical moments and polishes them into these grand, legendary tales of almost superhuman sacrifice. You see this in films like Ghazi with its epic submarine battle, or Razi, where a 20-year-old acts as an undercover spy. These films elevate specific missions into literal cultural myths, solidifying this grand idea of ultimate patriotic sacrifice for the nation. And there's actually one more, the reflexive mode. It's rare, but super fascinating, because it actually breaks the fourth wall of memory. Take the 2017 movie 1971 Beyond Borders. It shows the sons of rival 1971 soldiers meeting years later as UN peacekeepers. This mode literally asks the audience to take a critical step back and look at how war memories are inherited, drawing attention to the tragic, destructive nature of generational conflict on both sides. So what does this all mean? Well, whether it's through the gritty realism of the experiential mode, the legendary heroics of the mythical mode, or the critical lens of the reflexive mode, this explainer shows us something absolutely crucial. Cinema is a highly organized, highly effective tool. It's utilized by nations all over the globe to curate a shared reality, forging an unshakable patriotic identity by ensuring their preferred version of history becomes our permanent collective memory. I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on the next time you grab some popcorn and the theater lights go down. When you're watching your favorite historical film, whose memory are you actually inheriting? Keep questioning, keep learning, and thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.